Welcome to Atheists Talk. I'm your host tonight, George Kane. Tonight I'll be speaking with someone who really needs little introduction, familiar with the atheist community in Minnesota. August Berkshire has held just about every position with Minnesota Atheists. He's been the president, he's been the chair, he's currently a director of Minnesota Atheists. He's also a director for the Minnesota chapter of not the secular, yes.
The Secular Coalition for Minnesota.
Secular Coalition for Minnesota,
Yeah.
right, okay. Sorry about that, August. And tonight, we'll be discussing the question of free will. August is a very prominent spokesperson. He has lectured on this topic already, and will be giving other lectures on this topic. And so we're going to share his thoughts on free will with the audience of Atheist Talk. So August, please explain, what is the problem with free will?
Yeah. Well, first I should preface this by saying that I think free will is an illusion, but not all atheists agree with me. So when I speak on this topic, I'm just speaking for myself, not on behalf of Minnesota Atheists, which has not taken a position on this.
Yep.
So the problem with free will is that free will violates cause and effect. That in order for us to have free will, there'd have to be something that's an uncaused cause. But the way I look at it, when we make a decision, that decision, we've made it for reasons, and we have reasons for those reasons, and you can trace that all the way back into our unconscious, all the way back into our genetics and into our experience in life. So there's been a chain of determinism that's led up to our decision, and it seems like it's free, but it's an illusion.
All right. So why is this question of interest to atheists?
Yeah. Well, we start with the basic difference between atheists and most religious people. Every religion that I know of believes in something supernatural. So there are two ways of looking at the world. One is called monism, that there's only one kind of substance. It's a natural world, a material world. And the other is called dualism, which believes that there's a material world, but there's also something non-material or supernatural or without a material substance, like a god, like a spirit, like a soul, whatever those things are. And as atheists, we're materialists, we're naturalists, believe in the natural world. And I think if you look at the natural world and cause and effect, I think, for me anyway, it leads me to think that free will is an illusion, that there's no possible way we could have free will.
Of course, there are idealists like solipsists, for example, who believe we only know our perceptions and cannot know for sure the existence of the material world.
Yeah, you could go there.
I suppose that's really irrelevant to the question. So go ahead, August. Present for us the case for strict determinacy, for the lack of free will.
Okay. Well, I think the default used to be that we had free will because we all felt like we did. And so it was up to people. The burden fell on my side to try to show that we don't have it. And now I think with our studies, our knowledge of the material world and neuroscience, which we'll get into in a bit, I think the burden falls on now people to show how it's possible we can have free will. I don't see how it's possible. If you accept materialism, that means thoughts are physical things as well. Our thoughts aren't something floating around in our head. They're determined by electrochemical actions in our brain. And just as when you, speaking of like electricity, when you turn on a flashlight, the bulb has no choice except to light. The electricity has no choice but to flow. And chemistry, if you leave some iron out in the rain, it has no choice except to rust. And same with our thoughts, our electrochemical thoughts. There's a chain of events, and there's no choice in what happens. In the universe, I think we can show that it does operate mostly by determinism because science wouldn't work. We couldn't replicate scientific experiments except that one thing leads to another repeatedly, and that's how we get confidence in our scientific method. The best case for, or best example of strict determinism was laid out by Pierre-Simon Laplace in 1814. And he wrote of a being, he said, imagine a being that was all-knowing, and it knew the position of every material thing in the universe, every star, every planet, every atom. It knew the positions, and it knew all the forces acting on those particles, those material things. If you have that kind of knowledge, you would know the future. You would know how one force would act on a material thing. And you would know the future, and there would be no free will. And that was in 1814 that he expressed that. So if everything is material and one thing leads to another in a sort of chain of events, I don't see how free will is possible.
Now, I understand your argument on the neural electrochemical level, that there is strict determinism. But we really never get a chance to inspect very closely decisions that people come to at that level. Rather, we're experiencing them differently. I'm reminded a little of argument. One science popularizer wrote that our physical world is an illusion, that, for example, we look at this table and think that this table is solid, when in fact it's composed of tiny particles, and there's enormous space between each of the particles, such that this is really mostly empty space. And the argument against that is, well, you're really misusing language. When the words solid table mean something, and this is what we mean by solid table. Now, you're saying that free will is an illusion because the electrochemical actions are strictly determined. But we make choices, we think things over and decide on whatever basis, on many bases. And that's just sort of what we mean by free will.
No, I think what we mean by free will is that we could have acted differently than we did. And our brain has a program running that's based on survival and procreation, things like that. And our brain looks at options, which we could call choices, and it picks what it thinks is the best option based on the evolutionary program we've got running in our heads. So it's a choice, but it's not what we usually think of as a free will choice. That we could, given the same set of circumstances, we couldn't have helped but make that choice.
As I'm saying, on the electrochemical level, I agree completely. You know, as far as the neural pattern networks that you have and the connections that are made, and yes, that is a determined process. But that's not the way that we experience it. That's what we go to a restaurant one day and order ham and eggs, and the next day we order a vegetable omelet. You know, and all right, there are reasons for it, but none of which a person is aware.
There are a lot of unconscious reasons. Let's get into the brain a little,
All right.
We're talking about the brain.
Okay.
We're getting better and better at mapping what goes on in our brain, and we've gotten to the point where we can show somebody like a hammer and see what part of their brain lights up when they look at the hammer, and then show them a cat or something and see what part of the brain lights up. And then we can have them look at one or the other, but we don't see what they're looking at, only they do. And we look at their brain and we can identify from their brain activity which one they're looking at. Now, even beyond that, what's interesting is that there've been experiments where they've wired people up to fMRIs and things like that monitor the brain. And they say, now, whenever you want, lift your finger and tell us. They have a clock that's going on a screen. Tell us where the hand is on that clock when you make your decision to lift your finger. And so the person, when they want to, lifts their finger. That's when they think they've made their choice. Okay, the hand was on the 2 when when the thought came into my head to make the choice. Well, as it turns out, there's brain activity when the hand is on the 1 that they're not aware of. And that activity can predict the choice that they're going to make, whether they're going to raise their right finger or their left finger. They've even brought it down to 256 neurons that can predict with 80% accuracy whether they're going to lift their right or left hand. And this is unconscious activity that's going on before they make their choice. They think they're making the choice when it's at the 2. The choice has actually been made when the hand is at the 1. And then they have the illusion that they've made the choice.
Well, it sounds as if they've made the choice, but they're unaware of the processes, and there are certain things that are going on more quickly than others.
Yeah. Their unconscious brain has made the choice, and then we get back to what I was saying before, that how it made its choice was by weighing certain things. When we think of free will, we usually think of a conscious free will, not an unconscious free will.
Oh, yes, but I'm not really disputing free will. I think I'm not really certain how closely this example relates to, for example, more complex decisions that people make, and in which they appreciate the uncertainty and the likelihood that they're making a wrong decision.
Yeah, I mean, we're not sophisticated enough to measure brain activity for more complex questions.
Right.
But this at least shows the first glimmer from science of brain activity making a choice, a very simple choice, left or right finger being raised, but a choice being made by your unconscious that you're not aware of, and you're thinking it's you making the choice consciously, and you're not.
I'd have to see the experiment perhaps a little more closely, but it sounds as if there's more processing going on in the one case, in which you have you make a decision which finger to raise, and then think, what is it that I have to do? Record this other thing, so that you're meshing two actions.
No, they just say whenever you get the urge to raise your right or left finger, even before you raise your right or left, when you get that urge, where is the hand on the clock? And they always say it's at the 2, for example. But the brain activity happened at the 1 before they were conscious of it. So.
All right. Let's see. Now, we know that, or at the current level of science, we believe there is indeterminacy in the universe, such as Heisenberg, that there's things that we cannot know. We cannot know both the location and the movement of subatomic particles. And then there are things that are indeterminate just because of human limitations, that we can't know things. And the determinacy of the neurochemical operations of the brain seems to be rather at that level for most choices that people undertake.
Most of this indeterminacy occurs at the atomic level. And it might affect some of the things going on in our brain, but for the most part, it's at too small a level.
Well, supposedly it was behind the Big Bang and the creation of the universe. That's a pretty substantial level.
I'm talking about now free will in our brains. And even to the extent that quantum indeterminacy is active, and of course it is active to some degree at least, we can't control that. I mean, by the definition of indeterminacy, we can't control it, so it's no avenue for free will, as some people think it is. And even after a quantum indeterminate event, then although you can't predict what the outcome of that indeterminate event is, the result of it then determines the next thing, so you're kind of back to determinism anyway.
Now, at the neural level, we seem to be input-output machines, right? That various forms of input are processed. We have these neural connections and pathways and so on, and the body makes an output. All right. So, are we just robots, or is there some difference between us and robots?
No, actually, we are essentially robots.
Okay.
And so this often raises the question, well, why do we need consciousness then?
Okay.
Well, if you're just a robot, all you can do then is react to something that affects you. And a lot of plants are like this. An insect attacks them and they produce a chemical in reaction to that insect. But you can function even better if you can predict the future, and you need consciousness for that. Consciousness enables you to envision different scenarios for your actions. So that's why we would have consciousness. But I do essentially do view us as robots. This might get into some, we'll probably talk about later, fatalism.
Okay.
And I don't think we have to you want me to talk about that now a little bit? Sure. It can be sort of depressing to our egos to think, oh, well, there's no free will, why bother? Why not, I can't control my actions because there's no free will. Why don't I just lay in bed all day and wait for something to happen to me? But we're programmed by evolution to get bored by doing nothing, because usually doing nothing is not a very good survival strategy. And being curious about our environment is usually a pretty good survival strategy. So, and if you're enjoying your life, does it really matter if it's due to brilliant free will decisions you're making or a really good non-free will evolutionary program that's running in your brain? You're going to enjoy life either way. It's only in just the latter case you can't take any credit for it, but you can still enjoy it. It can still have meaning to you. My love for my partner, Rachel, is no less meaningful or deep to me just because I can't help but love her, so to speak. So I don't think we have to be pessimistic. I think it's just an egotistical thing. If we can get over the ego, we can still enjoy our lives, even if free will is an illusion.
I don't think that the consequences necessarily of this determinacy is necessarily fatalism. I think that there's the issue of perspective, that indeed if we were subatomic gnats, we would see this table as being all open space. But indeed we see it as solid, and we have the word for it, solid. That's what it means. Now, as far as our life to an omniscient being could be described in its entirety if we knew the initial state of every atom and so on, and that's fine. But indeed, I don't see how anything changes as a result of that knowledge. That my actions, my preferences are educable. There are all sorts of people who are trying to educate me politically, who
vice versa.
There are manufacturers who are trying to persuade me of how wonderful their products are. So I can be trained. I can also be trained to take into account ethical issues. I can be trained to act responsibly, or to believe that the only thing of interest to me is my own welfare, and so I can harm other people with absolutely no twinge of guilt. We think that those are characteristics of people who are behaviorally defective, and perhaps in some cases chemically. And
I think you're absolutely right that even if free will is an illusion, the same things are coming at you from the environment, and you're still weighing your best decisions. And you can't predict a lot. Due to our limitations, we can't predict the future, and so it's interesting to us, what's going to happen? So the only thing that it might affect is our egos, because otherwise we still, even me, who is pretty convinced, I mean not 100%, but 99% convinced that free will is an illusion, I still can't get over the feeling that I have free will. It just, and so I'm still experiencing life just as I did before.
And not just a feeling, I think. You can't stop acting as if you have free will, as if you are making decisions based upon criteria that that you justify,
Hmm.
and so on. So,
Yeah.
all right. Now, can you give us some examples of things where we think we have free will that it's actually not an operation of free will?
Yeah, there's a lot of things. For example, our choice of religion, or whether or not we have religion. A lot of people say, well, you choose atheism. And I actually have never felt like I chose atheism. I felt like I couldn't help but be an atheist. That given how my brain works, it's a brain that looks for evidence, that spots contradictions. I see a lot of contradictions in supernatural beliefs. I see no evidence for any of them. The world just makes more sense to me from an atheist's point of view. And I really can't help this. And that's one of the problems with Pascal's wager, is if we could force ourselves to believe. I mean, I could sort of pretend I believe in a God to try to save me from hell, but I would always know that I'm lying to myself. I really can't force myself to believe in a God. It's not a choice. And for a believer, the other way too, they really can't force themselves to be atheists if they really believe it. So religious belief is one area. Who we love is another area. We really can't force ourselves to love somebody that we don't love. And if we do love somebody, and for instance, they break up with us, we're going to be heartbroken, and we can't really help that. Maybe knowledge of the fact that free will is an illusion might help us a little bit to get over some grief a little quicker than we might otherwise. And food preference is another area. We don't really choose what we like. Now, we can accustom ourselves to food through habit, because evolution would favor beings that could get used to diverse food sources. But I hate Brussels sprouts, and there's nothing that's going to ever change that, probably. I can't pretend.
Maybe a good advertising campaign by the Brussels sprout growers.
Now, you're an excellent chef, and there's probably a way you could prepare them that I would like them, but certainly in the ways I've had them, no.
All right. Now, there's a question about your determinism. How are you going to prove it? Now, we like to think of ourselves as very scientifically minded. And so we like to have a firm observational experimental basis for a claim like that. Whereas, isn't determinism really just an a priori postulate?
No, I think we observe determinism in action when we repeat a scientific experiment. So one thing does lead to another. Every once in a while, there may be some randomness in there that would throw off our results. But if determinism was not, by and large, the operating way of the universe, at least on the macro level, science wouldn't work.
Well, think of David Hume's famous argument about causation, that we never see causation. We never see one thing cause another. That causation is just a category of the mind to which that we affix to the constant conjunction of events.
Right. I mean, this thing happens and then this other thing happens.
Every time, yeah.
And we see that often enough that's to us cause and effect and determinism. I mean, if that's how the universe is operating, and there's no reason, and our brain is part of the universe, I think that would apply to our brain, and thus I don't see how there could be free will.
Okay, can you, well, it really boils down to the old argument about the validity of induction. Deductive reasoning, we know, leads to correct results. Induction, there's always the possibility of error, that you're asserting that determinism is your inductive conclusion from observation, whereas to an opponent may seem like it's just an a priori principle, postulate. But all right, let's take a couple of minutes to discuss evolution. Do you think that evolution is the cause of our belief in free will?
Well, I think that evolution is blind as to whether or not we have free will. Evolution rewards good choices, whether those are brought about by a free will decision or non-free will programming. And to my mind, free will is not necessary to explain any of our thoughts or actions. They can be explained without free will. That doesn't prove there's no free will, but if you don't need it to explain it, and it would seem that lack of free will is a simpler state, and that having free will is a more complex state of mind, that if we were to apply Occam's razor, meaning the simplest solution is likely to be the best, it doesn't prove that it is, but it seems likely, that lack of free will, being the simpler solution to what we observe, that we don't need to invoke free will, that I think therefore, like I say, the burden of, not the burden of proof, but the default position should be that we don't have free will, and it's now, I think, up to the other side to show how it's possible to have free will, because it is a more complex solution when we don't need it.
Well, I think in an argument, both sides have the justification, or have the responsibility to justify whatever it is they're claiming. And
Yeah.
so,
Well, I'm seeing cause and effect and determinism, at least on the macro scale. And I'm seeing that, and I challenge someone who believes in free will to show me how it's possible.
now the Christianity, of course, is divided. There are the Calvinists, determinists, who think that God sees everything and knows who will be saved and from before they're born. Whereas for Catholics, free will is extremely important. That's the basis of the whole justification of sin. Well, unfortunately, we're really out of time now, August. I know there's a lot more that to go into, and that you will be going into at the presentations that you have lined up for this. But for our audience, I hope that if you're interested in this, that you'll contact us. And the contact information has been on your screen many times throughout the program. If you send us your postal address, we'll send you one free issue of our newsletter. And this is really action-packed, not action-packed, but information-packed newsletter. And if you send us your email address, we'll put you on distribution for our weekly calendar. So if you're interested in us, we're interested in you.